Imagine, sitting down for a quiet Wednesday night at home, maybe settling in with a good book or your favorite show, and suddenly the peace is shattered by the sound of gunshots echoing through the night. It sounds like a scene from a crime drama, but for 53-year-old Willie Troy Price Sr., this is a terrifying reality.
It's a jarring contrast, isn't it? The normalcy of everyday life suddenly disrupted by violence, and what makes this case even more unsettling is that it happened in a seemingly quiet community in South Carolina, a place where you wouldn't expect such a tragedy to unfold.
Exactly. Willie, known affectionately as Pops to his neighbors, was tragically killed in a drive-by shooting on January 18th, 2017. And what's truly haunting is that 5 years later, the case remains unsolved, leaving investigators and the community searching for answers.
Unsolved cases like this one often leave a deep scar on the community. It's not just about the loss of life, but also the lingering questions, the fear that something like this could happen again, and the sense that justice has been elusive.
Absolutely. We're going to piece together the events of that night, examine the evidence, and explore the different theories that have emerged over the years. Hopefully by the end of this, you have a deeper understanding of the unsolved case of Willie Troy Price Sr., and maybe even some of your own theories about what really happened.
Let's start by setting the scene. It was around 10:45 p.m. when Denise, Willie's neighbor and close friend, heard several loud bangs coming from his house. She initially thought it might be someone doing some late-night target practice, a sound that sadly wasn't uncommon in the area.
It's chilling to think that gunfire was a familiar sound in this community. Did Denise mention anything else about those initial moments? What made her decide to go outside and check?
According to her testimony, something felt off about the sound of the gunshots that night. It wasn't just the sound itself, but also a gut feeling, a sense that something was wrong. She couldn't shake this feeling, so she decided to go outside to investigate. And that's when she saw a car speeding away from Willie's house without its lights on.
That detail about the car speeding away is significant, isn't it? It suggests a deliberate attempt to escape the scene quickly and unnoticed, adding to the suspicion surrounding the incident.
Exactly. If it were just target practice, as Denise initially thought, there wouldn't be a need to flee the scene in such a hurried and clandestine manner. This detail immediately elevates the incident from a possible noise complaint to a potential crime scene.
Right, and tragically, Denise's suspicions were confirmed moments later in the most heartbreaking way. Roy Jones, Willie's stepson, came rushing out of the house, shouting that Pops had been hit. Denise immediately ran into the house and found Willie on the living room floor lying in a pool of blood.
Can you imagine the shock and horror of that moment? Denise, having known and cared for Willie for years, now finds him fatally wounded. The emotional impact of such a scene is unimaginable.
Absolutely. The transcript doesn't go into detail about what actions Denise took immediately after finding Willie, but I can only imagine the mix of panic, fear, and desperation she must have felt.
It's important to remember that Denise was the first person on the scene after the shooting. Her actions in those crucial moments likely played a role in preserving the scene for the investigators who would arrive soon after.
So while we don't have specific details about what Denise did in those initial moments, we can assume she called 911 and possibly tried to provide some first aid to Willie. Sadly, though, it was too late. Willie was pronounced dead at the hospital just after midnight.
This is where the official investigation begins. Police arrive, secure the scene, and start the meticulous process of gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. One of the first people they spoke to was Roy Jones, Willie's stepson, who had been at the house earlier that evening.
Roy's account of that night must have been crucial for the investigators. What did he tell them?
Roy told police that he'd been with Willie earlier that evening, but had left to use the restroom at his mother's house, which was just a few doors down. He was dropped back off at Willie's just moments before the shooting occurred.
So he was there just before the shooting, but he didn't see the car speeding away that Denise described.
According to his statement, he didn't see anyone or any vehicles near the house when he was dropped off. His account suggests the shooting happened very quickly and unexpectedly, almost as if the perpetrators were lying in wait for the right moment to strike.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
Did Roy mention hearing anything unusual, like a car door slamming or footsteps approaching the house? Anything that might have indicated someone was lurking nearby?
There's no mention of any such details in his testimony. He simply stated that he was dropped off, walked into the house, and shortly after the shooting occurred. It paints a picture of a sudden and shocking attack.
It makes you wonder if the shooters were specifically targeting that time frame
Mm-hmm.
when they knew Roy would be away and Willie would be alone and vulnerable.
That's certainly a possibility investigators would have considered. The timing of the attack does raise questions about whether the perpetrators had been observing the house and knew Willie's routines. It's the kind of detail that could point towards a planned and targeted attack rather than a random act of violence.
This case is already starting to feel like a puzzle with a lot of missing pieces.
It is. And as investigators dug deeper, they quickly discovered that Willie, who was retired and disabled, had no known enemies. He was well liked in the community, known as the neighborhood handyman, always willing to lend a helping hand. So the question that haunted everyone, from the investigators to those who knew him, was why? Why would anyone target him?
It's baffling. You'd think if someone wanted to harm Willie, there would be some indication of a motive, some prior altercation or a history of bad blood.
Yeah.
But everything points to him being a kind and well-respected member of the community.
Exactly. And that's what makes this case so perplexing. The absence of a clear motive makes it incredibly difficult to narrow down suspects or establish a solid theory of the crime.
It's almost like investigators were starting from scratch, with only the chilling details of the crime scene and the limited witness accounts to guide them.
And to make matters even more complicated, they were also dealing with the possibility that Willie's murder wasn't an isolated incident. Just minutes before Willie's shooting, another shooting occurred about 6 miles away on Lion Drive. A 34-year-old man was critically wounded in that incident, and police initially suspected a possible connection between the two shootings.
So we have two shootings happening within minutes of each other, both in the same city. It's natural for investigators to consider if they're connected in some way.
Absolutely. The close proximity and time and location raises immediate red flags. Investigators would have been looking for any potential links between the victims, their social circles, or any activities they might have been involved in.
Did the police ever confirm if they found a direct link between Willie and the victim of the Lion Drive shooting? Was it the same weapon, for example?
The details of the investigation are still largely confidential, so it's difficult to say for certain if they found a direct link. However, the fact that investigators considered the Lion Drive shooting as a potential connection suggests they were looking into the possibility of gang violence, drug activity, or some other form of organized crime that might have involved both victims.
It makes you wonder what kind of environment this community was dealing with. On the one hand, you have Willie, a beloved figure who seemed to have no enemies. On the other, you have these sudden and brutal acts of violence happening within minutes of each other.
It speaks to the complexities of any community. You can have pockets of peace and harmony existing alongside undercurrents of tension and violence. It's a reminder that crime and tragedy can strike anywhere, regardless of outward appearances.
And let's not forget the attempted murder that happened earlier that same day, where a man was shot in the foot while walking back to his apartment. The transcript doesn't go into detail about why investigators connected this incident to Willie's case, but it adds another layer of complexity to an already puzzling situation.
It does, and it raises the question, was this a day of escalating violence that culminated in Willie's murder? Were all three incidents connected in some way, or was this a series of unfortunate coincidences? It's the kind of question that would have kept investigators up at night, trying to piece together the puzzle and determine if there was a larger pattern at play.
It's a lot to take in, and we're only just scratching the surface of this case.
Okay.
We have two shootings, an attempted murder, and no clear motives for any of them. And then we have the witness testimonies, which, while helpful, also add to the mystery.
Let's go back to the witnesses for a moment. Remember Sonia, the neighbor who lived a few houses down from Willie. She initially dismissed the gunshots, thinking it was just another one of her neighbors firing off his gun. It's almost eerie how that detail comes up again, speaking to the level of gun violence that was unfortunately somewhat normalized in that community.
Right. It's chilling. And then she goes outside to confront her neighbor about the noise, but instead she sees a van leaving Willie's house. She described it as boxy, possibly silver, and low to the ground, almost like an older model. That's a separate vehicle from the one Denise saw speeding away, indicating that potentially more than one vehicle and possibly multiple individuals were involved in the shooting.
Exactly. Sonia's testimony throws a wrench into the whole story. It suggests a level of coordination and planning that goes beyond a random act of violence. If there were multiple vehicles and individuals involved, it points towards a more organized effort, which could be related to gang activity, a planned hit, or some other form of criminal operation.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion. Every new piece of information seems to reveal another layer of complexity and intrigue. And then there's the part about Sonia's suspicion that some of Willie's visitors were involved in drug activity.
Now, it's important to note that this was just Sonia's speculation. There's no concrete evidence to confirm that Willie was involved in drug dealing. But Her observation does raise the possibility that his home may have been targeted for reasons other than a personal grudge.
So we're left wondering, was Sonia's intuition accurate? Was Willie involved in something that might have made him a target? Or was he truly an innocent victim caught in the crossfire of something larger than himself?
Those are precisely the questions investigators would have been grappling with, and it's worth noting that community speculation can be a double-edged sword in investigations like this. It can provide valuable leads, but it can also lead to false accusations and distract from the truth.
It highlights the importance of separating fact from fiction,
Yeah.
evidence from hearsay. And speaking of witness accounts, let's talk about the testimony of the unnamed neighbor who lived around the corner.
Ah, yes. This is where the story takes another intriguing turn. This neighbor told police that after hearing the gunshots, she went outside and noticed a white car parked near the abandoned house on the corner. It was a car she'd never seen before, and it seemed abandoned.
Now, this detail about the white car is intriguing because it suggests that someone may have been observing Willie's house prior to the shooting. It could have been a lookout point or a staging area for the perpetrators, adding another layer of premeditation to this already complex case.
It certainly fits the pattern of a planned attack. If the perpetrators were casing Willie's house, it suggests they were gathering information, observing his routines, and waiting for the right moment to strike.
It's like something straight out of a detective novel. You have the mysterious white car lurking in the shadows, the multiple vehicles fleeing the scene, and the whispers of potential drug activity.
And the police never confirmed whether they followed up on this lead about the white car, but it adds to the growing list of unanswered questions surrounding this case.
So many questions, so few answers. It's enough to make your head spin.
It is a lot to process, and just when you think you've considered all the angles, the investigation takes another unexpected turn. As the police continued to piece together the events of that night, they started to consider a new theory, that Willie might not have been the intended target at all.
Wait, so they were thinking maybe the shooters had the wrong house or the wrong person in mind.
Precisely. They couldn't find anyone who had a motive to harm Willie directly, and their investigation had revealed the presence of a high-risk individual who frequented the area.
So who was this high-risk individual? Did Sergeant Cash, the lead investigator, reveal any details about their identity or their connection to the case?
Unfortunately, no. Sergeant Cash couldn't disclose much about this individual, citing the need to protect the ongoing investigation. Revealing too much information could jeopardize their efforts to track down this person or any potential accomplices.
That's understandable. It's a delicate balance between keeping the public informed and safeguarding the integrity of the investigation. But it still leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions. What kind of high-risk activities was this individual involved in? Could it be connected to the Lion Drive shooting or the attempted murder earlier that day?
It's all speculation at this point,
Yeah.
but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. The fact that this individual frequented the area where Willie lived, coupled with the police's reluctance to reveal details about their activities, suggests a connection to some form of criminal enterprise.
It's almost like investigators were dealing with multiple mysteries layered on top of each other. You have the immediate question of who shot Willie, but then you have these broader questions about the other shootings, the suspicious vehicles, and the potential involvement of a high-risk individual.
It's a complex web of interconnected events, and the challenge for investigators was to untangle those threads and determine which ones were directly related to Willie's murder.
It's frustrating, isn't it? 5 years have passed, and there's still no resolution. No closure for Willie's family and friends.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that behind every unsolved case like this one, there are real people grappling with loss and searching for answers. Willie's family and friends deserve justice, and the community deserves a sense of peace and closure.
You're right. Unsolved cases have a ripple effect. They not only leave families grieving, but also create a sense of unease and uncertainty in the community. When violent crimes go unsolved, it can erode people's trust in law enforcement and their sense of safety.
Exactly. It can leave people feeling vulnerable and questioning whether their community is truly safe. And that's why it's so crucial for anyone with information about Willie's case to come forward, even after all this time.
You never know, even the smallest detail, something that seemed insignificant at the time, could be the missing piece that helps investigators crack the case wide open.
Right. And remember, there are ways to share information anonymously if you're concerned about your safety.
So for our listeners out there, if you have any information about the murder of Willie Troy Price Sr., no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact the Anderson County Sheriff's Office. You can reach Sergeant Kendall Cash directly at 864-231-2809. Or call the Detective Bureau line at 864-260-4435.
Don't let fear or silence stand in the way of justice. Your voice could make all the difference.
This deep dive has taken us through a labyrinth of twists and turns, leaving us with more questions than answers. Was Willie the intended target, or was he caught in the crossfire of a larger conflict? What role did the other shootings and suspicious vehicles play in this tragedy? And will those responsible ever be brought to justice?
While we may never know the full truth of what happened that night, one thing is certain. Willie's life mattered. He was a beloved member of his community, and his loss has left a void that can never be filled.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What do you think happened to Willie Troy Price Sr.?
Think about the details we've discussed. The witnesses' accounts. The possible connections. Sometimes revisiting a case with fresh eyes can spark new insights and lead to breakthroughs.
And if you have any information, no matter how small, please don't hesitate to contact the authorities. Every piece of the puzzle brings us closer to justice for Willie.